The smell of burnt coffee always reminded me of failure. I stood in the kitchen of our two-bedroom apartment, watching brown liquid bubble over the rim of the pot I'd forgotten to turn off. The acrid scent curled through the air like smoke signals, and I didn't move to stop it. My hand gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white against the chipped laminate, and somewhere in the apartment behind me, my mother's alarm clock was buzzing. Had been buzzing for the past 10 minutes. Steam rose in lazy spirals. The coffee hissed as it hit the heating element. I should have turned it off, should have called out to Mom, should have done a lot of things. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. The glass showed me a girl I barely recognized. 17 years old, dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. My Riverside Community College sweatshirt hung loose on my frame. I'd lost weight in the past year, though I couldn't remember when. Maya, Mom's voice drifted from the bedroom. Did you make coffee? The words felt strange in my ears. Too familiar, like a song I'd heard before but couldn't place. I turned off the burner with a hand that trembled for reasons I couldn't name. Yeah, Mom, it's ready. But that was wrong. The coffee wasn't ready. It was ruined, bitter, and burnt, just like everything else. My phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up. One new message. Sophie. My sister's name made something tight coil in my chest. I picked up the phone and the device felt heavier than it should, like it was made of lead instead of glass and aluminum. Sophie. Can you cover my shift at the diner? Emergency came up. I typed back without thinking. Again? 3 dots appeared, dancing their predictable rhythm. Sophie, please, I'll owe you. The phone slipped from my fingers. It clattered against the counter, spinning once before settling face up. Sophie's message glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Because I'd had this exact conversation before. Not yesterday, not last week. 5 years ago. The kitchen tilted. I gripped the counter harder, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The burnt coffee smell intensified, mixing with the sharp scent of the lemon dish soap we always used, the cheap dollar store brand in the yellow bottle. Everything was too vivid, too present, the hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the faucet that Dad had promised to fix before he left. The way morning light was just beginning to creep through the window, turning everything gray-blue. I knew that light. Knew exactly how it would stretch across the linoleum, reaching the crack near the stove by 6:47 a.m. Maya? Mom appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her faded blue bathrobe. Her hair was shorter than it should be, cut in that bob she'd worn when I was in high school, the one she'd grown out after Sophie's graduation. She looked younger. The lines around her eyes were softer, less pronounced. My throat closed. Honey, you're shaking. Mom crossed to me, her slippers making soft, shuffling sounds on the floor. She touched my forehead with the back of her hand, the gesture so familiar it hurt. Are you getting sick? You can't afford to miss work. What's today's date? The words came out hoarse. Mom frowned. No. September 23rd. Are you sure you're okay? September 23rd, my senior year of high school. 2 weeks after I'd taken the SAT, 3 weeks before Stanford would call. No. 3 weeks before Stanford would call Sophie. I pushed away from the counter, my legs unsteady. This wasn't possible. Couldn't be possible. The last thing I remembered was, what? Driving home from my shift at the warehouse, the rain on the windshield, the truck that ran the red light, its headlights blazing through my window like the eyes of God, the impact. Maya, you're scaring me. Mom's voice sharpened with worry. Sit down. I'll call Mr. Peterson. Tell him you can't come in. No. I forced myself to focus on her face, to really see her. She was 43 in this moment, though she looked 50. And the years of double shifts and cigarettes she thought we didn't know about had carved themselves into her skin. But she was alive. Here. Real. In my last memory, my other memory, Mom had been 68, living in a nursing home in Bakersfield because neither Sophie nor I could afford anything better. I'm fine, I lied. Just didn't sleep well. Mom studied me with those sharp hazel eyes that never missed anything, even when she was too tired to act on what she saw. Finally, she sighed. Pour me a cup of that coffee before it gets cold. And answer your sister. She texted me too. Apparently, it's a real emergency this time. It wasn't. The emergency was Tyler Morrison, Sophie's boyfriend, surprising her with Lakers tickets. I knew because I'd covered her shift. Son then worked a double when she called the next day, saying she had food poisoning from the game's hot dogs. The memory sat in my mind like a stone, heavy and undeniable. I poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Mom said world's best nurse with a chipped rim. Mine was plain white with a crack running up one side. The liquid was dark as oil, and I knew without tasting that it would be bitter enough to make your teeth ache. "You going to answer her?" Mom prompted. My thumb hovered over the phone screen. In my original life, God, was I really thinking of it that way? I'd said yes, had always said yes. Sophie would ask, and I would cover her shifts, help with her homework, loan her money I couldn't afford to lose. Because that's what big sisters did. That's what good daughters did. And Sophie had taken my SAT scores and submitted them with her college applications. The knowledge burned through me like acid. I could see it so clearly now. Sophie at the kitchen table, filling out forms for Stanford, Berkeley, USC. Mom bragging about her daughter's 1580 SAT score to the nurses at work. The way Sophie's face had glowed when the acceptance letters came. My acceptance letters. My scores. My future. "Maya?" I typed. "Sorry, can't. Already promised Mom I'd help her with something. The lie tasted like copper on my tongue." Mom raised an eyebrow. "You did? Thought we could clean out the garage?" I said, "before it gets too hot?" It was a weak excuse. Mom knew it, but she was already running late, already downing her coffee too fast, already grabbing her purse and keys. She kissed my forehead on her way out, her lips dry and cool, tasting like coffee and the vanilla chapstick she kept in her pocket. "Don't forget to eat something," she called from the door. "And call Sophie back. Whatever's going on between you two lately, work it out. Life's too short for sisters to fight." The door closed, the lock clicked, and I was alone in the kitchen of my childhood, 17 years old again, with memories of a life I'd already lived burning behind my eyes. The garage smelled like motor oil and old cardboard, exactly as I remembered. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the dimness, and felt the weight of impossibility settle over me like a shroud. This wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't have this kind of texture, this specificity of detail. I could feel the rough concrete under my bare feet. You see the way dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the single bulb? There was the shelf where Dad had kept his fishing gear, still organized the way he'd left it before he moved to Arizona with his new girlfriend. There was the box of Sophie's elementary school art projects, the corner crushed where I'd accidentally stepped on it while helping Mom move things around. I knew what was in that box. Could picture every finger painting, every construction paper turkey. My phone buzzed again. Sophie, probably. Or maybe one of my coworkers from the diner, wondering if I could pick up an extra shift. In my first life, I'd worked 3 jobs my senior year. The diner, a grocery store, and weekend babysitting for the Chens next door. I'd been saving for community college, trying to ease the burden on Mom. Sophie had been saving for new clothes to wear to Stanford. I turned off my phone. The SAT scores were the key. They had to be. In, 3 weeks? The call would come. Some administrator at Stanford's admissions office doing a routine verification check. They'd want to speak to Sophie about her scores, maybe ask her to retake the test or provide additional documentation. But Sophie wouldn't be home. She'd be at Tyler's house or the mall or wherever 17-year-old girls with stolen futures went to avoid responsibility. And I would answer the phone, like I always did. Would confirm that, yes, this was the Morgan residence. Would listen as they asked questions I didn't understand the significance of. In my first life, I'd been too naive to realize what was happening. Had simply told them what they wanted to know, thinking it was some boring administrative thing. Sophie had handled it later, she'd said. Just a mix-up with the testing center, nothing to worry about. By the time I understood, really understood what she'd done, it was too late. Sophie was halfway through her freshman year at Stanford, pre-med, the pride of our family, and I was working doubles at a warehouse, my own college dreams deferred indefinitely. I'd never confronted her. That was the thing that haunted me most. Even in my old life, after everything, I'd kept quiet. Because what would be the point? Ruining Sophie's life wouldn't give me back mine. Mom was so proud, and Sophie was doing well, actually thriving, going to become a doctor and make something of herself. At least that's what I'd told myself. Right up until the accident that killed me at 34. Driving home from another night shift, too tired to see the truck until it was too late. I pulled out my phone and turned it back on, navigated to my photos. Though my hands knew the path before my mind did, there, buried in a folder I'd labeled school stuff, was a photo I'd taken of my SAT score report, just in case I needed it for college applications. 1580, math, 790, evidence-based reading and writing, 790. I'd been so proud, had studied for months, using books from the library, practicing every night after my shifts. Mom had splurged on the test fee, even though it meant eating ramen for 2 weeks. I'd wanted to make her proud, wanted to prove that even without Dad's child support, even in our cramped apartment in a bad neighborhood, I could be someone. The scores had come in the mail on a Friday. I remembered because Mom had been working a double, and I'd had to wait all day to show her. Sophie had been home, though, had seen the envelope before I did. "Holy shit, Maya," she'd said, reading over my shoulder. "You're a genius." I'd laughed it off, said I just got lucky, but Sophie hadn't laughed. She'd gone very quiet, very still. And 2 weeks later, when her own SAT scores came back, 1290, respectable but not Stanford material, she'd cried in our shared bedroom for hours. I should have known then. Should have seen it, but I'd been too busy comforting her, telling her that scores didn't matter, that she was smart and talented and would get in somewhere great anyway. Too busy being the good sister. My phone buzzed. A new message. "Sophie, are you mad at me or something?" I stared at the words. In my old life, this was around the time things had started to feel strange between us. Small tensions I couldn't name. The way she'd stopped asking me for help with her homework. The way she'd started avoiding my eyes when we talked about college. The way she'd stolen my entire future and then looked me in the face every day for 17 years, never once confessing. My fingers moved across the screen. Not mad. Just busy. Sophie. With what? Sitting in the garage? Ice ran down my spine. I looked up at the small window above the workbench. Sophie's bedroom was directly above the garage. She could see me from her window. Sophie. Come inside. I want to talk to you. Maya. Later. I'm helping Mom. Sophie. Mom's at work. Stop being weird. I turned off my phone again and sat down on an overturned paint bucket. The metal was cold through my jeans, grounding me. Think. I needed to think. The easy answer was to confront her now, before she could submit the applications. Tell Mom what was about to happen, prevent the theft before it occurred. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of how small Sophie had looked, crying over her SAT scores. Or maybe it was the weight of knowing that in my first life, despite everything, Sophie had become a doctor, had saved lives, had done good in the world, even if she'd built her career on my stolen foundation. Who was I to take that away? The thought made me sick. This was the same justification I'd used before, the same spineless reasoning that had kept me quiet for 17 years. Sophie deserved her success because she'd worked hard at Stanford, because she'd become something, because her future was worth more than mine. Oh, but it was my future first, my scores, my work. And this time, I had a choice. I stayed in the garage until my feet went numb from the cold concrete. The September heat hadn't penetrated here yet, and the air smelled like it always did in the mornings, damp and slightly musty, with undertones of fertilizer from the bag Mom kept meaning to use in her container garden. When I finally went inside, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, an old UCLA t-shirt and shorts. She looked so young it hurt. Her hair was longer than I remembered, falling past her shoulders in waves she spent hours perfecting with a straightener. Without makeup, you could see the scatter of freckles across her nose, the slight overbite she was self-conscious about. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. "Slow, you're being weird." "I'm not being weird." I grabbed a glass from the cupboard, filled it with water from the tap. The water tasted like metal and chlorine. Our building had old pipes. "You didn't answer my texts." I answered. "Barely." Sophie drummed her fingers on the table, a nervous habit she'd had since middle school. "And you never say no when I ask for shift coverage. Never." "Because you've trained me not to," I thought. Years of manipulation, subtle and otherwise, until saying yes became automatic. Well, I'm saying no now. I drank the water even though I wasn't thirsty, needed something to do with my hands. Why? Because I have things to do. Like what? Sit in the garage? Sophie's voice rose, taking on that edge it got when she wasn't getting her way. "Come on, Maya, what's going on? Are you mad about something?" "Yes. I'm mad about everything. About the 17 years you stole from me. About the way you looked Mom in the eye every Thanksgiving and told her how grateful you were for her support. About the way you became Dr. Sophie Morgan while I stayed Maya Morgan. Warehouse worker, community college dropout, nobody. But I couldn't say that, because those things hadn't happened yet. Might not happen at all, if I played this right. I'm not mad, I said carefully. I just can't cover your shift. That's allowed, isn't it? To say no sometimes? Something flickered across Sophie's face. Hurt, maybe? Or fear? Of course it's allowed. I thought you'd understand. Tyler got these tickets, and I never get to do anything fun, and... So tell Mr. Henderson the truth. Mr. Henderson owned the diner, a perpetually exhausted man in his 60s who'd given both of us jobs more out of pity than necessity. Tell him your boyfriend got Lakers tickets and you'd rather go to the game. I can't do that. He'll think I'm flaky. You are flaky. The words came out harsher than I intended. You call out at least once a week. Sophie's eyes widened. That's not fair. Isn't it? We stared at each other across the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the building, someone's TV was playing too loud. A game show, the host's voice bright and artificial. Sophie looked away first. Forget it. I'll figure something out. She stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum, and headed toward our bedroom. I watched her go. This girl who was my sister and a stranger, and felt the weight of the future pressing down on me. In 3 weeks, way Stanford would call, in my first life, I'd let it happen. Had played my part in my own destruction, but I wasn't that Maya anymore. I died once already, spent 17 years learning exactly how much that one moment of theft would cost me. This time, I would be ready. The diner sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, a squat building with faded yellow siding and a neon sign that buzzed even during the day. I'd worked there for 2 years in my first life, slinging hash browns and weak coffee to truckers and families who couldn't afford anywhere nicer. Walking through the door felt like stepping into a memory. The smell hit me first, grease and coffee and the chemical sweet scent of industrial cleaner. Then the sounds, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the griddle, the endless loop of oldies playing from speakers that crackled on the high notes. Everything was exactly as I remembered, down to the crack in the fourth booth's vinyl seat and the way the floor tiles were slightly uneven near the kitchen entrance. Maya. Mr. Henderson looked up from the register, his weathered face creasing into a smile. You're not on the schedule today? I know, What? What was I doing here? Wanted to check something. His smile faded into concern. Everything okay at home? In my first life, Mr. Henderson had been the closest thing I had to a father figure after Dad left. He'd given me extra shifts when Mom got sick, let me take home leftover food without commenting on it, helped me figure out my FAFSA forms even though I'd never end up using them. When I dropped out of community college to work full-time, he'd been the one to tell me I was making a mistake. I'd ignored him, of course, had thought I knew better. Everything's fine, I said. I just wanted to ask you something. About Sophie. Mr. Henderson's expression shifted, not quite uncomfortable, but close. He wiped down the counter, even though it was already clean. What about her? How many shifts has she called out from in the past month? He paused, the rag still in his hand. Maya, please, I need to know. He sighed, the sound heavy with an exhaustion I recognized. 7 out of 12 scheduled shifts. 7? Jesus. In my memory, I'd covered most of those. Had run myself ragged working doubles and triples, telling myself it was temporary, that Sophie was going through something, that she needed me. And you keep scheduling her anyway? Your mom asked me to. Mr. Henderson met my eyes. Said Sophie was having a hard time, needed the structure, and I figured you'd keep covering for her. You always do. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. He knew. Of course he knew. Everyone probably knew. That I was the reliable one, the doormat, the sister who would sacrifice anything for family. Not anymore, I said. Mr. Henderson studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Good. About time someone in your family learned to say no to that girl. She has a shift tonight, right? 5 to close. Why? No reason, just wanted to make sure. I turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Henderson, thank you for everything you've done for us. His expression softened. You're a good kid, Maya. Don't let anyone make you forget that. I left before he could see the tears in my eyes. Sophie didn't come home before her shift. I knew she wouldn't. In my original timeline, she'd texted at 4:30 saying she felt sick, that she couldn't make it. Could I please, please, please cover for her just this once? The text came at 4:32. Sophie. Maya, I'm so sorry, but I'm throwing up everything. Think I have food poisoning? Can you please take my shift? I know you said you're busy, but I'm literally dying. I stared at the message. In my old life, I'd believed her. Had rushed to get ready, called Mr. Henderson to say I was coming in, worked until 2 a.m. serving truckers and insomniacs while Sophie was probably cheering at the Lakers game, Tyler's arm around her shoulders. Not a care in the world. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The easy thing would be to say yes, to fall back into old patterns. Sophie would go to her game, I'd work her shift, and everything would continue on its predestined path toward my destruction. But I was so tired of being easy. Maya, sorry you're sick. Hope you feel better soon. 3 dots appeared immediately. Sophie, wait, does that mean you can't cover? Maya, that's what it means. Sophie, Maya, please, I'm begging you. Mr. Henderson will fire me. Maya, then maybe you should go to work. Sophie, I can't. I'm literally puking. Maya, funny how you're well enough to type. The dots appeared and disappeared several times. I could picture her sitting on Tyler's couch or in his car, trying to figure out the right combination of words to manipulate me. She was good at it, had years of practice. Finally, Sophie, why are you being such a bitch? I turned off my phone. Mom came home at 7:15, smelling like hospital disinfectant and exhaustion. She found me in the living room, pretending to study for a calculus test I'd already aced 17 years ago. Where's Sophie? She asked, dropping her purse on the couch. At work, I assume. She texted me saying she was sick. She texted me too. Mom's eyes narrowed. And I didn't cover for her. She's not actually sick, Mom. She wanted to go to a basketball game with Tyler. I expected anger, disappointment. Instead, Mom just looked tired. She sat down heavily on the couch, still in her scrubs, and rubbed her eyes. How do you know? Because she always does this. She's called out 7 times in the past month. Mr. Henderson told me. He had no right. He had every right. She's a terrible employee. And I've been enabling her by covering all her shifts. The words tumbled out, sharp and true. And you've been enabling her too by asking Mr. Henderson to keep giving her chances. Mom was quiet for a long time. The TV played across the room, some sitcom with a laugh track, and I could hear our neighbor's dog barking through the thin walls. Sophie needs structure, Mom said finally. After everything with your father, I went through everything with Dad too, and I still show up to my shifts. You're different. You've always been different. More responsible. Because you made me that way. The anger surprised me with its intensity. You needed someone to be the adult, and Dad wasn't going to do it, so it had to be me. I've been the responsible one since I was 10 years old. Since you started working doubles and needed someone to take care of Sophie? Maya, I'm not saying it to hurt you, I'm saying it. I met her eyes. I love Sophie, but I can't keep sacrificing myself for her, and you can't keep asking me to. Mom looked like I'd slapped her. Her eyes were wet, and for a moment I saw her, really saw her, as a woman who'd done her best in impossible circumstances, who'd raised 2 daughters alone while working 60-hour weeks, who'd chosen between the electric bill and groceries more times than she could count, who'd loved us fiercely even when she was too tired to show it. I never wanted you to sacrifice yourself, she whispered. I know, but that's what happened anyway. We sat in the heavy silence, the TV laugh track absurdly cheerful in the background. Finally, Mom stood up. I need to call Sophie. She's fine. She's at the Lakers game with Tyler. How do you... Mom shook her head. Never mind. I don't want to know. She went to her bedroom and closed the door. I heard her voice, muffled and sharp, the tone she used when she was genuinely angry. Sophie's future was being rewritten in real time, and I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. This was what accountability looked like. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. I hate you. I deleted it without responding. 3 days later, Sophie was still barely speaking to me. She'd been fired from the diner. Mr. Henderson had reached his limit when she didn't show up and couldn't provide a doctor's note. Mom was disappointed but not surprised, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in 17 years. Or was it the first time in 3 days? Time felt slippery. unreliable. Sometimes I'd forget which version of my life I was living. I'd reach for my car keys and remember I was 17, didn't own a car yet. I'd start to worry about my warehouse shift and realize that job didn't exist anymore. Wouldn't exist for years if I played this right. If I could change my future. The question kept me up at night. How much could I change? Was the universe fixed, destined to course correct no matter what I did? Or was everything malleable, waiting to be reshaped? I tested small things first. Wore my hair differently, took a different route to school, started conversations I'd never had before, and the world kept spinning, accommodating each change like water flowing around stones. But the big test was still coming. October 14th, the day Stanford would call. I'd circled it on my calendar in red ink, something I never would have done in my first life, because I hadn't known it mattered. But I knew now, knew exactly what day it would be, what time around 3:30 p.m. between classes, and what the woman on the phone would say. "Is this the Morgan residence? I'm calling from Stanford University's Office of Undergraduate Admissions. We need to speak with Sophie Morgan about her application." In my first life, Sophie had been out. I'd taken a message, left it on her bed. She'd handled it later, she said. Made a phone call, cleared everything up. No big deal. This time would be different. "You're being weird again," Sophie said. We were in our bedroom, a cramped space we'd shared since childhood, barely big enough for our twin beds and a shared dresser. Sophie was at her desk, supposedly working on her college essays. I was on my bed, a calculus textbook open in front of me, not seeing any of it. "I'm studying." "You've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes? So it's weird. Everything's been weird since that morning you freaked out about the coffee." Sophie spun in her desk chair to face me. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" I looked at her. Really looked. She was wearing an old debate team hoodie and had her hair piled on top of her head in a messy bun. Without makeup, her face looked younger, more vulnerable. She was my little sister, the girl I'd braided hair for and read bedtime stories to and protected from everything I could. Until she destroyed me. Except she hadn't. Not yet. Might not ever if I stopped her. "I've been thinking about college," I said carefully. Sophie's expression shuddered. "Okay, about applications, SAT scores, all of that." "Why, you said you were probably just going to community college anyway." Had I said that? I must have, in my first life. Had already started the process of diminishing my own dreams, making them small enough to fit into the space Sophie had left me. "I'm reconsidering," I said. Reconsidering what? Everything. Where I want to go, what I want to do, whether I want to settle for community college when I have a 1580 SAT score. The room went very quiet. Sophie's face did something complicated. Surprise, then fear, then a careful blankness. "You have a good score," she said. "I have an excellent score. Good enough for Stanford, Berkeley, MIT. I paused. "Any school I want, really." That's great, Maya. Really." But her voice had gone flat. "Are you going to apply to those places?" "I'm thinking about it. But the application fees. I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll ask for fee waivers. Or pick up extra shifts." I held her gaze. "I worked really hard for that score, Sophie. Studied every night for months. It would be a waste not to use it." Sophie turned back to her computer, her shoulders rigid. "You should do whatever you want." "I intend to." I went back to my calculus book, the numbers still meaningless, and listened to Sophie's breathing quicken. She knew. Maybe she didn't know that I knew, but she knew something had shifted. That the sister who always said yes, who always accommodated, who always made herself smaller, that sister was gone. In her place was someone who'd already lived through the consequences of being too kind. October 14th arrived with unseasonable heat. I woke up sweating, tangled in sheets that felt too heavy, and lay still for a moment, heart racing. Today. Sophie was already gone. She had an early class or a study group or something. I'd stopped tracking her schedule. Mom was in the kitchen, making breakfast before her shift, and the smell of eggs and toast reminded me so viscerally of my childhood that I had to close my eyes against the wave of emotion. How many mornings had we done this? Thousands. How many more would we get? "You okay?" Mom asked when I emerged. "Fine. Just hot." "They're saying it might hit 95 today, in October." She shook her head, sliding scrambled eggs onto a plate. "Climate change is real, whatever your Uncle Frank says." I took the plate, the ceramic warm under my fingers, and sat at the table. The eggs were slightly runny, the way Mom always made them, and I ate them anyway. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. If Sophie and I both got into the same college, but we couldn't afford to send both of us, who would you choose? Mom froze, the spatula still in her hand. That's a horrible question. But if you had to choose, I'd figure out a way to send both of you. But if you couldn't, if you absolutely had to pick one. Mom set down the spatula and turned to face me. Her expression was pained. Why are you asking me this? Hypothetically? Maya, I love you both equally. I would never. But Sophie's younger. She needs more guidance, more structure. She's struggled more since Dad left. I kept my voice neutral, clinical. It would make sense to choose her. I would never make that choice. And I don't understand why you're. Mom's phone rang, cutting her off. She glanced at it, sighed. It's the hospital. I have to take this. She stepped into her bedroom, and I was left alone with my runny eggs and the knowledge that she hadn't actually answered my question. Because she didn't have to. I already knew. School crawled by with agonizing slowness. I sat through AP English, then history, then lunch, watching the clock and trying not to think about what was coming. My phone sat in my pocket like a loaded gun. 3:30 p.m. That's when they'd called before. I'd been in the library, supposed to be studying for a chemistry test, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost hadn't answered. This time I left my last class 10 minutes early, claiming stomach problems. Drove home in the beat-up Civic Mom had bought from a coworker, a car I'd forgotten I used to drive, a car that would die 2 years from now when the transmission went, parked in our spot and sat in the heat, watching our apartment window and waiting. At 3:28, I went inside. The apartment was empty. Mom at work, Sophie at school, or with Tyler, or wherever she went to avoid responsibility. I stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd smelled burning coffee and started to remember my death, and waited. 3:29. 3:30. The phone rang at 3:32. Unknown number. My hand shook as I answered. Hello? Hi, is this the Morgan residence? A woman's voice, professional and slightly harried. I'm calling from Stanford University's Office of Undergraduate Admissions. I need to speak with Sophie Morgan about her application. Every word was exactly as I remembered. Even her inflection was the same. The slight emphasis on need, the way she pronounced Stanford with reverence. This is the Morgan residence, I said. But Sophie isn't home right now. Can I take a message? Are you a family member? I'm her sister, Maya. A pause. I could hear papers rustling on her end, the distant sound of other people talking. An office full of people making calls, checking applications, determining futures. Actually, Maya, that's interesting. I'm looking at Sophie's application right now, and there's some confusion about her SAT scores. The College Board has 2 test takers registered at your address with very similar names and birth dates. Can you help me clarify something? My mouth went dry. What do you need to know? According to our records, the SAT scores submitted with Sophie's application, 1580, Math 790, Reading 790, those were taken by a Maya R. Morgan, born March 15th. But Sophie's application lists her birthday as April 3rd, and when we cross-referenced with the College Board, there's no SAT record for a Sophie Morgan at your address. The room tilted. This wasn't how it had happened before. Before they just wanted to verify Sophie's scores, had maybe asked a few questions. This was more thorough, more suspicious. Had I changed something already, or had I simply not been told the whole story the first time? I'm not sure I understand, I said, buying time. It's a simple question. Did Sophie take the SAT in September, or did you? I did. And did Sophie also take the SAT? Perhaps at a different testing center, or on a different date? I don't think so. I mean, I don't know for sure. We don't really talk about... Miss Morgan, I need to be clear about something. Submitting fraudulent test scores is grounds for immediate rejection and possible legal action. If Sophie used your scores without permission, this is a very serious matter. We need to speak with her directly. My heart hammered. She's not home. When will she be home? I don't know, after school sometime. Please have her call me immediately. My name is Patricia Chen, and my direct number is... I wrote it down on the notepad we kept by the phone, the same notepad where I'd written it 17 years ago. My handwriting was shaky. Miss Morgan? One more thing. Yes? Did you give Sophie permission to use your test scores? The question hung in the air between us. In my first life, I'd said yes without thinking, had believed Sophie's story about a mix-up at the testing center, had thought I was helping her clear up a bureaucratic error. This time, I knew better. No, I said. I didn't. Patricia Chen's voice softened slightly. I see. Well, we'll need to speak with Sophie to get her side of the story, but Maya, you should know that you have excellent scores. If you're interested in applying to Stanford, I'd encourage you to do so. We have fee waivers available for students who demonstrate financial need. Thank you, I whispered. Have Sophie call me today, please. This needs to be resolved quickly. She hung up. I stood in the kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone and trying to breathe. I'd done it, changed it, told the truth, and now everything was different. Sophie came home at 5:47. I heard her keys in the lock, the familiar pattern of sounds she made. Door open, bag drop, shoes kicked off. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, already scrolling through her phone, and stopped when she saw me sitting at the table. What are you doing? Waiting for you. That's not creepy at all. She went to the fridge, pulled out a can of Diet Coke. Why? I slid the notepad across the table. Patricia Chen's name and number written in my shaky handwriting. Stanford called. Sophie's hand froze on the soda can. What? Stanford University, about your application. They have some questions about your SAT scores. The color drained from her face. What kind of questions? The kind where they want to know why you submitted my scores instead of your own. The silence was deafening. Sophie stood perfectly still, the Diet Coke forgotten, and I watched 17 years of lies collapse in her eyes. I don't know what you are talking about, she said finally. Don't. Maya, don't lie to me. Not about this. I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum. I know what you did. I know you submitted my SAT scores with your college applications, and Stanford knows too. How did they? Sophie caught herself. I didn't. They cross-referenced with the college board. My name is on the scores, Sophie. My birthday. They want to know if I gave you permission to use them. And what did you tell them? Her voice was small, frightened. The truth. That I didn't. Sophie's face crumpled. She set down the soda can with shaking hands and gripped the counter. Maya, please. Please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You saw my scores, saw they were better than yours, and decided to take them. To submit them as your own. To steal my future. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I demanded. Explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you committed fraud. Like you were willing to destroy me to get what you wanted. I wasn't trying to destroy you. Sophie's voice broke. I needed a chance, Maya. Just one chance. You don't know what it's like being compared to you all the time. Perfect Maya, who never complains, who always gets good grades, who makes everything look easy. You think my life is easy? I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. I work 3 jobs, Sophie. I study until 2 a.m. because that's the only time I have free. I wear the same clothes until they fall apart because I'm saving every penny for college. None of this is easy. But it comes naturally to you. School, work, being responsible. I have to fight for everything. Tears were streaming down Sophie's face now. And I thought, if I could just get into a good school, if I could have that one advantage, maybe I could finally be someone. Maybe Mom would finally be proud of me the way she's proud of you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mom is proud of you. Not the way she's proud of you. You're her rock, her reliable one. I'm just the problem child she has to make excuses for. I wanted to argue, but the truth was complicated. Mom did treat us differently, had always treated us differently. I was the one she confided in, the one she relied on. Sophie was the one she worried about, made allowances for, protected from consequences. That doesn't make what you did okay, I said quietly. I know. Sophie slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the cabinets. She pulled her knees to her chest, looking impossibly young. I know it was wrong. I thought if I got in, if I proved I could do the work, it wouldn't matter how I got there. And you always said you were fine with community college anyway. Because that's what I thought I could afford, not because it's what I wanted. But you never said, I shouldn't have to say. You shouldn't have taken what was mine. My voice rose despite myself. Those scores were mine, Sophie. I earned them. I worked for them. And you were just going to… what? Well, let me throw them away while you used them to get into Stanford? I was going to tell you, she whispered. Eventually, when it was all over and I'd proven I could do it, I was going to tell you everything and pay you back somehow. 17 years, I said. That's how long eventually would have taken. Sophie's head snapped up. What? I'd said too much, but I was too angry, too exhausted from carrying this secret across 2 lifetimes to care. You never would have told me, Sophie. I know that because I know you. You would have taken my scores, gone to Stanford, become Dr. Sophie Morgan, and convinced yourself you'd earned it. And I would have stayed quiet, because that's what I always do. I make myself smaller so you can be bigger. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. But this? I gestured at the notepad with Patricia Chen's number. This is justice. Sophie buried her face in her knees and sobbed. I watched her, feeling nothing but a cold, hard satisfaction. This was what needed to happen. This was the price of theft. The front door opened. Mom's voice called out, "Girls, I'm home early. They were overstaffed, so…" She appeared in the kitchen doorway and froze. What's going on? Sophie looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. Mom, I did something really bad. And there it was. The confession I'd waited 17 years to hear. Mom took it better than I expected. Or maybe worse. It was hard to tell. She sat at the kitchen table while Sophie explained everything. The SAT scores, the applications, the plan to use my results as her own. Mom's face went through a complicated series of expressions. Shock, anger, disappointment, grief. When Sophie finished, Mom was very quiet. You were going to steal your sister's future, she said finally. I didn't think of it that way. How else is there to think of it? Mom's voice was sharp. You took something that didn't belong to you and planned to use it for your own gain. That's theft, Sophie. And fraud. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Mom turned to me. Did you know before today? It was a complicated question. I suspected something was wrong, the way she was acting, avoiding me. And when Stanford called, I shrugged. The pieces fit together. Why didn't you come to me? I wanted to give Sophie a chance to do the right thing. Mom studied me for a long moment. You're a better person than I am. I would have told me immediately. Would you? I wanted to ask. Or would you have tried to protect Sophie? To minimize the damage? To make it all go away like you always do? But I didn't say that. Just sat quietly while Mom turned back to Sophie. You need to call Stanford, Mom said. Explain what happened. Withdraw your application. Mom, please. This isn't negotiable. You committed fraud. The only reason we're not discussing lawyers right now is because Maya didn't give them permission to use her scores. But that could change. Sophie looked at me desperate. You wouldn't. I said nothing. Maya, please. I know I messed up, but I'm still your sister. You can't ruin my life over this. You tried to ruin mine. I didn't. I just wanted a chance at my expense, using my work, my scores, my future. I leaned forward. You want to know the worst part? I would have helped you if you'd asked, would have tutored you for the SAT, helped you study, done everything I could to help you get your own good scores. But you didn't ask. You just took. Sophie's face crumpled again. I'm sorry. I know, but sorry doesn't change what you did. Mom stood up, her movements tired. Sophie, get the phone. Call Stanford now. Can't we wait? Talk about this more? No. This ends today. Sophie got the phone with shaking hands, dialed Patricia Chen's number while Mom and I watched. The conversation was brief, painful. Sophie admitted everything, her voice small and breaking. When she hung up, she looked destroyed. They're flagging my application for fraud, she whispered. All the schools I applied to will be notified. I'm probably never getting into a good college now. Mom's expression softened slightly. Then you'll go to community college, like Maya was planning to do. But nothing. You made your choice. Now you live with the consequences. Sophie ran from the room. A moment later, I heard our bedroom door slam. Mom and I sat in the kitchen, the silence heavy between us. You knew, I said, didn't you? Before today. You knew something was wrong? Mom's hands were folded on the table, her wedding ring. She still wore it, catching the light. I suspected. The way you two were acting around each other, the tension. But I didn't want to believe, she trailed off, that Sophie would do something like this? That I'd raised someone capable of it. Mom's voice broke. I failed you both. Failed you by not protecting you. Same, and failed Sophie by not teaching her better. You didn't fail anyone. You did your best in an impossible situation. My best wasn't good enough. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was rough from years of harsh soaps and constant hand washing, her nails cut short. These were the hands that had braided my hair and checked my homework and worked 60-hour weeks to keep us fed. You gave us everything, I said. Sophie's choices are her own. Mom squeezed my hand, her eyes wet. What are you going to do? About college? I don't know. Apply, I guess. See what happens. You should apply to Stanford. Use your own scores this time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Maybe, or maybe somewhere else. I have options now. You always had options, honey. You just couldn't see them. She was wrong, but I didn't correct her. Because in my first life, I hadn't had options, had been so ground down by work and responsibility and Sophie's betrayal that I couldn't imagine a future beyond the warehouse and the double shifts and the slow erosion of my dreams. But this time was different. This time, I had a chance. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. Sophie and I existed in careful orbits around each other, sharing a bedroom but barely speaking. She'd withdrawn all her college applications, not just Stanford, but everything. The fraud flag would follow her, making it nearly impossible to get into any reputable school. Mom suggested community college, online courses, maybe a gap year to work and figure things out. Sophie just nodded silently, her earlier fire gone. I tried not to feel guilty, tried to remember that this was justice. That Sophie had brought this on herself. But late at night, lying in my bed while Sophie slept across the room, I couldn't help wondering if I'd been too harsh. In my first life, Sophie had become a doctor, had saved lives. Did that future matter? Did the good she would have done outweigh the theft that made it possible? But then I'd remember the 17 years I'd lost, the warehouse shifts and the aching loneliness and the slow death of every dream I'd ever had, and my guilt would harden back into righteous anger. Sophie had stolen from me. This was what accountability looked like. I threw myself into my college applications with an intensity that surprised even me. Stanford, yes, but also Berkeley, MIT, Caltech, Princeton. I wrote essays about perseverance and poverty and the cost of dreams deferred. I requested fee waivers, letters of recommendation from teachers who barely knew me but could see the desperation in my eyes. And I used my SAT scores, my real, legitimate, hard-earned scores, on every single application. Mr. Henderson hired me back at the diner, gave me Sophie's old shifts plus some extra ones. The money was good and I needed it. Application fees added up, even with waivers. And besides, the work kept me busy, kept me from thinking too hard about what I'd done. One night in early November, I was wiping down tables after closing when Mr. Henderson approached me. You doing okay, kid? Fine. You're working a lot of hours. Need the money. He pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for me to do the same. I did, too tired to argue. Your mom told me what happened, he said, with Sophie and the SAT scores. Of course she had. Mom told Mr. Oh, Henderson, everything. He was her closest friend, had been for years. Okay, I said carefully. That took guts, turning her in. I didn't turn her in. I just told the truth. Same thing in this case. Mr. Henderson studied me. You feel guilty about it? Did I? Sometimes. Good. That means you're human. He leaned back in his chair. But don't let the guilt make you doubt yourself. What Sophie did was wrong. She stole from you, plain and simple. You had every right to protect yourself. Even if it ruins her future? She ruined her own future the moment she decided to cheat. You just made sure you didn't go down with her. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they just made me feel more tired. When I was your age, Mr. Henderson continued, I had a brother, younger, like Sophie, and he was always getting into trouble. Well, always needing to be bailed out. My parents would ask me to help him, to cover for him, to give him money I didn't have. And I did, because that's what you do for family, right? Right, I said quietly. Wrong. You know what happened? My brother never learned, kept making the same mistakes over and over, because he knew I'd always catch him, and I kept getting smaller and smaller, sacrificing my own dreams to fund his, until one day I woke up at 35 working at a diner I hated, wondering where my life had gone. I looked at him. Really looked. Mr. Henderson was in his 60s now, still working at the same diner, still serving the same food to the same customers. Still here. What happened to your brother? I asked. Got himself together eventually, once I stopped enabling him. Became an accountant, has a nice family now. Sometimes he thanks me for cutting him off, says it was the wake-up call he needed. And sometimes he still resents me, still thinks I should have helped him more. Mr. Henderson shrugged. Can't control how people feel about you doing the right thing. You can only control whether you do it. I thought about that for a long time. About Sophie in our bedroom, bitter and resentful. About the future where she became a doctor and I stayed small. About the cosmic scales of justice, and whether they ever really balanced. Thank you, I said, finally. For what? For telling me that? For understanding? Mr. Henderson smiled. Get out of here, kid. Go home, and maybe ease up on the shifts a little. All work and no play makes Maya a dull girl. I left the diner smelling like grease and coffee, and drove home through streets that looked different at night. Quieter. More honest, somehow. Like the world had taken off its daytime mask. When I got home, Sophie was still awake. I could see her light under our bedroom door. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, hand on the doorknob, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I knocked. Come in? Sophie was at her desk, surrounded by papers. Community college brochures from the looks of it. She glanced at me, then back at her work. Hey, I said. Hey. What are you doing? Researching schools? Mom thinks I should start in January. Get a jump on things. I sat on my bed, my muscles aching from the shift. That's good. Is it? Sophie's voice was flat. Going to community college while you go off to Stanford or MIT or wherever? Being the family failure while you're the success? You're not a failure. Really? Because it feels like I am. Feels like I ruined everything because I was too stupid and desperate to just study harder for my own SAT. I didn't know what to say to that. It was true, after all. I hate you, Sophie said quietly. I know I shouldn't. I know you were just protecting yourself. But I hate you anyway. I know. Do you hate me? Did I? It was complicated. I hated what she'd done. Hated the betrayal. Hated the 17 years she'd stolen in another life. But did I hate her? No, I said finally. I don't hate you. Then why does it feel like you do? Because I'm protecting myself. And that means not letting you destroy me, even if it hurts you. Sophie turned to face me fully. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. I really am sorry. I know you don't believe me, but I am. I was stupid and selfish and wrong. I know. Then why can't you forgive me? Because I searched for the right words. Because forgiveness without consequences isn't really forgiveness. It's just enabling, and I can't do that anymore. So what? We just live like this forever, hating each other in silence? I don't know. Maybe. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Or maybe eventually we figure out how to be sisters again, just different ones than we were before. Sophie was quiet for a long time. I don't know how to do that. Me neither. We sat in silence, the gulf between our beds feeling wider than it ever had. And I wondered if this was the price of truth. This distance, this pain, this slow dissolution of a bond that had once felt unbreakable. But then I remembered the alternative. The warehouse, the lost years, the slow death of dreams, and I knew I'd made the right choice, even if it hurt. December came with unexpected rain. The kind of heavy, persistent rain that turned Los Angeles into a waterlogged mess. Streets flooding, traffic snarling, everyone complaining about the weather like it was a personal affront. I loved it. There was something cleansing about the rain, the way it washed everything clean and made the city smell like wet earth instead of exhaust. I'd stand outside between shifts at the diner, letting the rain soak through my jacket, and feel almost peaceful. My college applications were all submitted. Now came the waiting. Sophie had started classes at the community college in January, just as Mom suggested. She was taking general education courses. No, nothing special, but she went to every class and did her homework and seemed to be trying. We still barely spoke, but the hatred had dulled into something more like resignation. Mom was proud of her for taking responsibility and moving forward. I said nothing. On December 15th, my phone rang with a California number I didn't recognize. Hello? Hi, is this Maya Morgan? A different voice than Patricia Chen, but similar. Professional. Busy. Purposeful. Yes. This is Jennifer Wu from Stanford University. I'm calling about your application. My heart stopped. Okay. I wanted to personally reach out because your application really stood out to our committee. Your SAT scores are excellent, your essays were compelling, and your letters of recommendation painted a picture of someone who's overcome significant obstacles. No, we'd like to offer you early admission to Stanford University's class of 2030. The world tilted. I sat down on my bed, my legs suddenly weak. Are you there? Jennifer Wu asked. Yes, sorry, I'm just surprised. Don't be. You're an exceptional candidate. We're very excited to have you. She paused. I also want to acknowledge the situation with your sister. Patricia Chen made notes in your file about what happened. The fact that you maintained your integrity in such a difficult situation says a lot about your character. I didn't know what to say to that. We have a generous financial aid program, Jennifer continued. Based on your FAFSA information, we believe we can offer you a package that covers full tuition plus room and board. You'd still need to contribute for personal expenses. But the major costs would be covered. That's incredible. Thank you. You earned it, Maya. Congratulations. You'll receive an official letter in the mail within a few days. But I wanted to call personally. Do you have any questions? I had a million questions, but none that she could answer. No, I said. Thank you. Thank you so much. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, phone still in my hand. Stanford, full financial aid. Everything I dreamed of in my first life, handed to me in this one. The bedroom door opened. Sophie stood in the doorway, backpack over her shoulder, ready to leave for class. Who was that? She asked. Stanford. Her face went carefully blank. And? I got in. Full scholarship? Sophie stood very still. I watched emotions play across her face. Hurt, jealousy, anger, and something that might have been pride. Finally, she nodded. Congratulations, she said quietly. Thank you. You deserve it. You really do. She paused at the door. I mean that. I know. She left. I heard the front door close, her footsteps fading down the hallway outside our apartment. And I sat alone in our shared bedroom, holding my phone, and cried. Not from happiness exactly, and not from sadness. From relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming weight of getting a second chance, and actually, finally, taking it. Mom threw a small celebration dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and a cheap wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. We sat at our small kitchen table, the three of us, and Mom kept tearing up every few minutes. My daughter's going to Stanford, she kept saying. My daughter's going to Stanford. Sophie picked at her food, mostly silent, but she'd helped cook, had set the table, had even suggested we order a cake from the bakery down the street. Small gestures, but they meant something. Tell me everything, Mom said. When do you start? Where will you live? What are you going to study? September. Freshman dorms. And I don't know yet. Maybe biology or engineering. I paused. I have time to figure it out. You have all the time in the world, Mom agreed. Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom. And we need to go shopping. You'll need new clothes, supplies, all of it. We'll make a list, start saving. Mom, it's fine. The scholarship covers most things. Not everything. You need to look nice. Fit in with all those rich kids. I don't care about fitting in with rich kids. Well, you should. This is your chance, Maya. Your chance to make something of yourself, to get out of... She gestured vaguely at our apartment. All of this. I looked around at all of this. The cramped kitchen with its chipped counters and ancient appliances. The living room visible through the doorway, furnished with a sagging couch and a TV we'd bought secondhand. The water-stained ceiling and thin walls, and everything that marked us as poor. In my first life, I'd been desperate to escape this place, had seen it as a prison, a reminder of everything I couldn't have. But now I saw it as the place Mom had kept together through sheer force of will. The place where Sophie and I had grown up, where we'd been safe and fed even when money was tight. The place that had shaped me into someone strong enough to survive dying and being reborn. I'm not ashamed of where I come from, I said quietly, Mom's eyes filled with tears again. I know, baby, but that doesn't mean you have to stay. I don't plan to stay, but I don't plan to forget either. Sophie made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. When I looked at her, she was staring at her plate, her jaw tight. "Sophie," Mom said, "you okay?" "Fine, just happy for Maya." She stood up abruptly. "I have homework. Can I be excused?" "Of course. Take some cake with you." But Sophie was already gone, shutting herself in our bedroom. Mom sighed. "She's taking this hard." "I know. She's trying, though, really trying to move past it." "I know that, too. Maybe you could, I don't know, extend an olive branch? Help her study or something?" The suggestion made something hot flare in my chest. Why is it always my job to make things better? Why do I have to be the one to extend olive branches and help her and sacrifice myself? Mom looked startled. "I wasn't asking you to sacrifice." "Yes, you were. You're asking me to pretend everything's fine, to help Sophie feel better about the fact that she tried to steal my future. You're asking me to make myself smaller again." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Mom was quiet for a long moment. "I just want my daughters to love each other." "We do love each other, but that doesn't mean I have to fix her mistakes or manage her feelings. She's an adult. She needs to learn to handle her own consequences." "She's 19, Maya. She's barely an adult." "And I'm 17. Why am I expected to be more mature than she is?" Mom didn't have an answer for that. Well, we'd finished dinner in silence, the celebration mood thoroughly broken. When I went to our bedroom later, Sophie was already asleep, or pretending to be. I got ready for bed, quietly, then lay in the darkness, listening to her breathe. "I know you're awake," I said, finally. Sophie didn't respond for a moment. Then, "What gave me away?" "You snore when you're actually asleep?" A soft huff that might have been a laugh. "Shut up, I do not." "You do. It's subtle, but it's there." We fell quiet again. Outside, rain pattered against the window, steady and soothing. "I am happy for you," Sophie said. "I know it doesn't seem like it, but I am." "Thank you." "And I'm sorry, not just for the SAT thing, but for everything. For making you feel like you always have to be the responsible one. For taking advantage of that." "I know." "Do you think we'll ever be okay again? Really okay?" I thought about that. About the future I remembered, where we'd barely spoken after I figured out what she'd done, where family dinners were tense and holidays were awkward, and we'd slowly, painfully drifted apart until we were strangers who shared a mother. And I thought about this future, this messy, complicated present where Sophie was facing consequences and I was going to Stanford and everything was raw and painful, but at least it was honest. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe, if we both keep trying." "I'll try. I promise I'll try." Okay. Sophie rolled over, away from me. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain and wondered what kind of sisters we'd become. Whether honesty and boundaries and consequences could build something stronger than the codependency we'd had before. I didn't have answers, but for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I had hope. Spring came slowly, reluctantly. The rain tapered off, replaced by warm winds that smelled like jasmine and car exhaust. I finished my senior year in a strange daze, going through the motions of classes and work and applications to scholarships that might pay for books and clothes, and all the little things Stanford's financial aid didn't cover. Sophie and I existed in our careful détente. We were polite, sometimes friendly, but there was a distance between us that might never fully close. And I was okay with that. Other acceptance letters came. Berkeley, yes. MIT, yes. Caltech, yes. Princeton, waitlisted but ultimately accepted. I had options now. Real options. I chose Stanford, partly because of the financial aid, partly because it was the school Sophie had wanted, and there was a petty satisfaction in taking it. But mostly because when I visited the campus on an admitted students' day, something in my chest loosened, and I could breathe properly for the first time since my death. This was where I was supposed to be. Graduation came and went. I gave a speech as valedictorian, a position I'd earned with actual grades this time, not stolen ones, and talked about second chances and the courage it takes to change your life. Mom cried. Sophie sat in the audience next to her, applauding politely, her expression unreadable. That night, Sophie knocked on my bedroom door. "Come in." She entered, holding something behind her back. "I wanted to give you this, before you leave." She held out a small wrapped box. I took it, surprised. "What is it?" open it. Inside was a compass. Not a fancy one, just a simple brass compass on a chain, the kind you could buy at any hiking store, but it was polished and clearly new. And when I looked at Sophie questioningly, she shrugged. "So you always know which way you're going," she said, "and so you can find your way back. If you want to." My throat tightened. "Sophie, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I might never deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. And I hope, someday, you'll be able to see that." I looked at the compass, then at my sister. She'd lost weight over the past months, had a new hardness in her eyes that made her look older. The consequences of her actions had marked her, so changed her into someone I didn't quite recognize. Maybe that was a good thing. "Thank you," I said. "I'll treasure it." Sophie nodded, not quite smiling. "Good luck at Stanford. Show those rich kids what a girl from East LA can do." "I will." She left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat on my bed, holding the compass and feeling its weight in my palm. A small thing, a simple gesture, but it mattered. In my first life, Sophie had given me nothing when I left for community college. Had been too wrapped up in her Stanford preparations to notice my departure. This was different. This was something. Maybe not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. And that was enough. I left for Stanford on a bright September morning. Mom drove me, the Civic packed with my entire life. Clothes, books. The few decorations I'd bought at the dollar store to make my dorm room feel like mine. Sophie didn't come. She had class, but she'd left me a note on my pillow. "Kick ass, sis. Make me proud." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my wallet. The drive to Palo Alto took 6 hours. Mom talked the whole way, giving me advice about studying and making friends and staying safe. I half listened, watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to rolling hills, from everything I'd known to everything I was becoming. Stanford's campus was beautiful. Red-roofed buildings and palm trees and students lounging on perfect lawns. It looked like something from a movie, too polished and perfect to be real. But it was real. And it was mine. Mom helped me move into my dorm, a small single in an older building, and met my roommate's parents and cried 3 separate times. When it was time for her to leave, she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "So, so proud." "I know, Mom. Call me every week and eat properly and don't work too hard. I'll be fine. I know you will. You're my strong girl, my survivor." She had no idea how right she was. After she left, I stood in my dorm room and looked around. This small space, with its narrow bed and standard-issue desk and view of other students moving in, laughing, greeting each other with the ease of people who belonged. Did I belong? I pulled out Sophie's compass, let it dangle from its chain. The needle swung, settled, pointed north. I thought about the life I'd left behind. The warehouse job and the warehouse accident. The years of quiet resentment and deferred dreams. The moment of death. The truck's headlights blazing through my window. And I thought about this life, the burnt coffee and the phone call and the choice I'd made to tell the truth, the consequences that had rippled out from that moment, changing everything. Both versions of Maya Morgan were real. Both had lived and suffered and survived in their own ways. But this Maya, the one standing in a Stanford dorm room with a compass in her hand and a future stretching out before her like an unmapped country, this Maya had chosen herself, had said no to being small, had protected her dreams even when it cost her the easy love of her family, so had died and come back and learned that second chances are only worth something if you have the courage to take them. I put the compass on my desk, next to the photo of Mom and Sophie I'd brought from home. They were smiling in the picture, arms around each other, happy. It had been taken before everything fell apart, before the SAT scores and the lies and the painful reconstruction of our family. But we were still a family. Broken, maybe. Changed, definitely, but still bound together by blood and history and the messy, complicated love that survives, even when it shouldn't. Someone knocked on my door. "Hey, are you Maya? I'm Rachel from across the hall. A bunch of us are ordering pizza. Want to join?" I turned to see a girl with curly red hair and an easy smile, the kind of person who made friends effortlessly. In my first life, or I would have said no, would have been too tired from work, too busy studying, too aware of my own otherness to risk connection. But I wasn't that Maya anymore. "Yeah," I said, "I'd love to." And I walked out of my room into the beginning of something new. Epilogue. 4 years later, the auditorium at Stanford smelled like too many people in too small a space, expensive perfume mixing with anxious sweat and the musty scent of old carpeting. I stood in line with 500 other graduates, adjusting my cap for the 10th time, and tried to breathe. We were about to walk across the stage and collect our diplomas. 4 years of work, 4 years of growth, 4 years of becoming someone I'd never thought I could be. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Can see you from here. So proud. Sophie says good luck." I smiled and put the phone away. Mom and Sophie were out there somewhere in the crowd, sharing a row with Mr. Henderson and a few of my professors who'd become more than just teachers. They'd all made the trip to see me graduate. Things with Sophie were better now. Not perfect. We'd probably never be the effortlessly close sisters we'd been as kids, but we talked regularly. She'd finished her associate's degree and transferred to UCLA, was studying psychology and working part-time at a mental health clinic. She was good at it, her supervisor said. Empathetic. Understanding. "All that guilt makes me better at helping other people with theirs," she joked last time we talked. I'd laughed, but there was truth in it. Sophie had spent 4 years learning to live with what she'd done, to make amends not through grand gestures, but through small, daily choices to be better. And somewhere along the way, she'd found something she was genuinely good at. Not medicine, like in my other life, but close enough. Maya Morgan! My name echoed through the auditorium. I walked across the stage, shook hands with the dean, accepted my diploma in its fancy leather folder. The crowd applauded, Mom's voice rising above the rest with a whoop that made me grin despite myself. I'd graduated with honors, had a job lined up at a biotech startup in San Francisco, had published 2 research papers as an undergraduate, had proven over and over that I belonged here. But the best part, the part that made my chest tight with emotion, was that I'd done it honestly, with my own scores, my own work, my own merit. No one had given me this. No one had stolen it from me. I'd earned it. That night, we had dinner at a nice restaurant in Palo Alto. Mom insisted on paying even though I knew it would strain her budget. Sophie gave me a card she'd made herself with a drawing of the campus and the words, "You did it," written in her careful handwriting. "I'm sorry I wasn't here for all of it," Sophie said quietly while Mom was in the bathroom. "I know I missed a lot, that I can't really understand what these 4 years were like for you." "It's okay." "No, it's not, but thank you for saying that." She paused. "And thank you for not giving up on me. On us. You're my sister. I wasn't going to give up. Even when I gave you every reason to? Even then." Sophie's eyes were wet. "I don't know if I'll ever stop being grateful for that. For you giving me another chance." I thought about second chances. About dying in a car accident and waking up 17 again. About the choice I'd made to tell the truth instead of enabling Sophie's theft. About how that one decision had changed everything. "We both got second chances," I said. "We just had to be brave enough to take them." Mom came back then, and the moment passed. But it lingered between Sophie and me. This understanding that we'd both been broken and rebuilt into something stronger. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I had moved off campus junior year, I stood at my window and looked out at the Stanford campus. The buildings were lit up against the dark sky, beautiful and impossibly perfect. In a week, I'd be packing up, moving to San Francisco, starting my new job, starting the next chapter of a life I'd fought to build. I pulled out Sophie's compass from my desk drawer. It was tarnished now, well worn from 4 years of handling, but it still worked. The needle still pointed north, steady and sure. I thought about my first life, about Maya Morgan, warehouse worker, who died at 34 having never really lived, about the futures that could have been, but weren't, about the woman I'd become instead of the woman I'd been. And I thought about my mother's words from years ago. Life's too short for sisters to fight. She'd been wrong about that. Life was exactly long enough to make mistakes, to face consequences, to rebuild what had been broken. Long enough for second chances if you were brave enough to take them. I put the compass back in its drawer and turned off the light. Tomorrow I'd start packing. Next week I'd move to San Francisco. Next month I'd start my new job. And somewhere in all of that, I'd keep being Maya Morgan. Not the one who died, not the one who stayed small, but the one who chose herself and built a life worth living. The compass had been right. I'd found my way back. Not to who I was, but to who I was always meant to be. And that was enough. That was everything. The smell of burnt coffee always reminded me of failure. But standing in my Stanford apartment, diploma on the wall and job offer on the desk, and my whole future stretching out before me like an unmapped road, standing there, I thought maybe failure wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning of choosing better, the beginning of choosing yourself, the beginning of the second score that actually counted.